The breadbasket at Harlow's was always the first thing to go cold. Nora Callahan had learned that in her third week on the floor, back when she still believed tips reflected effort and that a smile could soften even the sharpest customer. That was 4 years ago. Now she knew better. She knew which tables ordered the expensive Bordeaux just to send it back. She knew which regulars tipped 15% on the pre-tax total. She knew that the hostess stand near the window was reserved for the kind of beautiful that got you moved to the better section. And that the back booths near the kitchen were where management quietly parked the girls they didn't know what to do with. Girls like Nora, she wasn't the kind of waitress that made it into the promotional photos Harlow's posted on their social media. She was curvy in the way that made the uniform pull a little too tight at the waist. Had dark, auburn hair that never quite stayed pinned the way it was supposed to, and walked with the quiet efficiency of someone who had long stopped waiting to be noticed. She did her job. She did it well. And most nights, that was enough. Most nights, table 12 just got seated, said Priya, one of the senior servers, sliding past her with a tray of oysters. Dante Ricci. Again, Nora didn't look up from the drink tickets she was sorting. Whose section? That's the thing. Priya paused, and Nora caught the edge of something amused in her voice. Marco called in sick. Janelle's already triple sat. And Chef Abelson specifically requested that someone fluent in ASL take the table. The tickets stopped shuffling. I'm the only one on the floor tonight who knows sign language. Nora said flatly. Funny how that works out. Priya didn't bother hiding her smile now. Good luck. He's... She searched for the word. Intense. Nora had heard the name before. Dante Ricci was the kind of name that moved through a restaurant, the way whether did you felt it before you saw it. He came in twice a month. Always the same corner table. Always with a rotation of men in dark suits who ordered sparkling water and barely touched their food. He was the kind of guest that made the floor manager straighten his tie and that made the sommelier appear from nowhere. He was also, according to the Whisper network that ran underneath every shift at Harlow's, the man who owned 4 legitimate businesses in the city and at least 2 that nobody talked about out loud. Nora smoothed the front of her apron and walked to table 12. He was younger than she'd expected. Not the silver-templed Don she'd built in her head, but a man in his mid-30s with dark hair pushed back from his face and a jaw that looked like it had made a few difficult decisions. He wore a charcoal jacket over a white shirt open at the collar, and his forearms resting on the white tablecloth with the ease of someone who had never been told to sit up straighter were covered in ink from wrist to elbow. He wasn't looking at the menu. He was looking out at the city skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling glass. The downtown lights beginning their nightly performance across the river. One of his associates leaned in and said something. The man, Dante, turned, and Nora realized, with a small jolt, that he hadn't heard her approach. Not because he was distracted, because he couldn't hear her at all. She stopped at the appropriate distance, waited until he looked toward her, and then brought her hands up. Good evening. My name is Nora. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like the specific alertness of someone who has spent their life reading rooms and had just encountered something unexpected in one. He sat up slightly. Then, slowly, he signed back. You sign. I do. She replied, fairly well. I hope. His mouth curved at one corner. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one, better than fairly well. He signed. You have good rhythm. She wasn't sure why that made warmth climb the back of her neck. But it did. She kept her face composed and pulled out her notepad. Can I start you with something to drink? What followed was the strangest and most strangely comfortable table service Nora had ever provided. Dante Ricci did not order the way the other power table men did, performatively, with an eye on whoever was watching. He asked questions about the menu with what felt like genuine curiosity. He wanted to know how the duck was prepared. He asked whether the risotto was finishing in butter or cream. When she told him it was butter, he raised an eyebrow and signed, "Correct answer." And she had to work hard to keep from laughing in the middle of a $400 dining room. His associates ate. They occasionally murmured to each other, but Dante conducted the whole of his evening's dinner through his hands. Through her hands, in a private and wordless conversation that occupied its own quiet frequency underneath the clink and murmur of the restaurant. When she brought the check, he signed, "I don't usually come back to the same restaurant this often, but you do." She signed, "I do." He looked at her steadily. "I will again." She walked back to the service station. Priya was waiting there with the specific expression of someone who had been watching the whole thing and was trying to decide how to monetize the information. "How'd it go?" she asked. "Fine," Nora said, and began entering her closing side work. "He left you something." Priya nodded toward the folded bill on the edge of the station. Nora picked it up. It was not a tip in the traditional sense. It was a card-thick cream stock. A name, a number, and 4 words written in a hand that pressed deeply into the paper. For the risotto conversation. She didn't call the number. Not for 2 weeks. It wasn't caution exactly, or rather, it wasn't only caution. It was the particular arithmetic of a woman who had learned to price things carefully before she reached for them. Dante Ricci was not a man you misread. He was not a man you accidentally wandered into a situation with and then found your way back out of. Everyone in the city with ears knew what his family name meant. What it had meant for 3 generations. What the Ricci organization touched and what it made sure stayed untouched. What she hadn't expected was for him to walk back into Harlow's on a Tuesday night in November, alone for the first time, and to sit down at table 12 with the particular patience of someone who was willing to wait as long as necessary. Nora took the table. "You didn't call." He signed. After she'd brought his water, "I wasn't sure I should." She admitted, "That's fair." He looked at the menu briefly, then set it down. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "Where did you learn?" He meant the signing. His hands were precise when he asked it. Careful. And she understood that for him this was not small talk. "My younger brother," she told him. "He's been deaf since birth. I grew up learning alongside him. Our mother made sure we all did." Something moved across Dante Ricci's face, not pity. She was grateful to note, but recognition. The specific expression of someone who understood what it meant to navigate a world that assumed you couldn't hear it. "How old is he now?" He signed. 26. "He's a structural engineer." "Good." Dante signed. "Then," after a pause, "my family never learned. Not one of them." She didn't know what to do with that. So she did what she usually did with things that required more than a moment. She held it and moved forward. "What would you like tonight?" He smiled. "A real one this time. Whatever you think is good." They had dinner together 6 times before Nora told her mother, not at Harlow's the 3rd time. He had left another card. This time with an address. Ardate. And the words, "If you're willing to let someone cook for you for once." She had stood in the service station holding the card for a long time. Then she had texted her friend Becca, who had responded with 17 question marks and one extremely emphatic instruction to go. She went. His home was not what she expected, and also exactly what she expected, a restored brownstone in the northern end of the city's oldest district. Full of dark wood and high ceilings, and the particular silence of a place that had been made deliberately quiet. He had a woman who cooked for him, an older Sicilian named Fia, who communicated with Dante through a private system of gestures that had clearly evolved over decades, and who sized Nora up in 3 seconds and apparently decided she passed. He made her espresso afterward. Not the machine kind, the stovetop kind. In a battered silver mocha pot that looked like it had survived several significant events. When she signed that it was the best espresso she'd had in the city, he looked quietly pleased in a way she was beginning to recognize as rare. My grandfather's pot, he told her. He taught me. Was he? She started. No. He could hear. He just thought the machine was lazy. She laughed. He watched her laugh. And something in his expression did the thing it had been doing with increasing frequency, that quality of concentrated attention. Like she was a room he was in the process of learning the dimensions of. The coworkers who had thought it was so funny to assign her to his table found out they were seeing each other, approximately 6 weeks after Nora had stopped finding it amusing to hide. Priya saw them at an opening downtown Dante's hand at the small of Nora's back. The way they turned to each other in the peripheral vision space that only people with a specific familiarity for each other occupy. She told Marcus. Marcus told the floor manager. The floor manager apparently told someone in the office. Because by the following Tuesday, Nora was called in for what was described as a routine check-in and turned out to be something else entirely. We just want to make sure you understand the optics, said David Sherwood, the general manager, who had never once in 4 years learned to pronounce her last name correctly. Harlow's has a certain reputation. Our staff is a reflection of the establishment. Nora looked at him evenly. I understand you. Relationships with high-profile guests can create complications. Am I being counseled about my personal life? She asked. Her voice was pleasant. Her hands were very still in her lap. Sherwood shifted. We're simply making sure. I'd like that in writing, she said. If Harlow's is going to establish a policy about employees' relationships with guests, I'd like the policy documented, along with whether it's applied uniformly. She paused. I can wait. The meeting ended shortly after. She told Dante about it that night. They were on his roof terrace, the city below them doing its usual magnificent indifference. And she signed the whole thing while he sat across from her, with his wine untouched, and his expression very still, in a way she had come to understand, was not the same as calm. What do you want to do about it? He asked. When she finished, nothing, she said. He handled. He looked at her for a long moment. I know you did. Another pause. I'm asking what you want. She thought about it. About 4 years of back booths and cold bread baskets, and the promotional photos she was never in. About the way Sherwood said her name. About Priya's smirk. And the assumption that the setup was a joke, because of course it was. What else could it be? Why would anyone? I want it not to matter. She signed, finally. I want to be somewhere, it doesn't matter. Dante set down his wine. Then let's solve that. What happened next was not a rescue. Nora was clear on that. Clear in a way that mattered to her. Because she had watched enough women in her life get rescued and then slowly disappear into the shape of whoever had done the rescuing. She was not interested in disappearing. What happened was a conversation, several of them, over several weeks. In the good faith register they had established between them, the one that came. She thought, from their particular mode of communication, where you couldn't drop words carelessly, where everything you said occupied its own space in the air between you and had to be meant. He had been looking, for some time, for someone to run the front-of-house operations at a new supper club he was opening on the west side of downtown. Not a front, a real restaurant. Built around a kitchen he had been funding quietly for 2 years. helmed by a chef he'd headhunted from a place in Lyon. The job required someone with floor intelligence, with grace under pressure, with the ability to read a room in real time and make the right call without being told to, "You have all of that." He told her, "I've watched you work. I know what you can do. You've been watching me for how long exactly?" she signed, with an eyebrow raised. "Since the first night." He said, without apology, "You managed 4 sections. A broken POS, a kitchen fire in the prep area that you kept off the floor, and still brought my risotto at the correct temperature." He paused. "I noticed things." She sat with it. The practical offer, the shape of what it could be, what it would mean to walk into a space where she had built the whole thing from the floor up, where no one had already decided what she was for. "I want to try," she told him. "Good." He signed. Then, quieter, "For the record, this is not why I know," she said. She did. She'd known for a while. "I know." The supper club opened on a cold Thursday in early March, to an invite-only crowd of 80 guests, in a space that Nora had spent 11 weeks turning from a raw shell of brick and salvaged timber into something with actual soul. She had hired the floor staff herself. She had designed the service model herself, a hybrid approach she'd been quietly developing in her head for 3 years that prioritized pacing over volume, guest experience over turn time. She had insisted on a communication card at every table, available to any guest who wanted it, because she had grown up watching her brother navigate restaurants that hadn't thought to wonder whether he existed. On opening night, she wore a deep green dress that her mother had helped her choose and her hair down for the first time in years. And she walked the floor with the ease of someone exactly where they were supposed to be. Dante found her near the bar at the end of the first seating. While he signed, she looked around the room, full tables, the quiet intensity of genuine pleasure at each one, the kitchen running clean, the staff moving with the confidence that comes from good preparation. Her preparation, it's working. She signed. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her since the first night at table 12, with that quality of attention that she'd finally learned to name, after months of careful study, as the look of someone who has spent a great deal of his life in a world that didn't account for him and has found, unexpectedly, someone it also didn't account for, and understood in that recognition something he couldn't quite put into words but didn't need to. "I told you." He signed. "You tell me a lot of things," she replied, "and I'm right about most of them. Most." She conceded. He reached over and straightened the small sprig of rosemary in the vase on the bar top. A precise and unnecessary adjustment. And she watched his hands do it, those careful, expressive, articulate hands, and thought about the breadbasket at Harlow's going cold, about what it cost to be the one who kept things warm for everyone else, about what it felt like to be, for the first time in a long time. On the other side of that equation, Priya came in for dinner in late April, with a man Nora didn't recognize, and the faint, wary expression of someone who has come to a place they weren't sure they had the standing to be. Nora greeted her at the door herself. "Table for 2, she asked. Priya blinked. "Recalibrated?" "Yes." "Yeah." "Hi." "Nora. This place is..." She looked around at the room. "It's incredible." "Thank you." Nora smiled. "We worked hard on it." She walked them to a table by the window, the best table. As it happened, the one with the city view and the good light, and handed them their menus and the communication card. She didn't explain the card. She just placed it there. The way she placed it at every table, because everyone deserved the option. When she turned to leave, Priya said, Quietly, Nora. She turned back. I didn't think Priya started. And stopped. Tried again. When we sent you to table 12. I didn't. I know. Nora said. Gently. Because she could afford gentleness now. Enjoy your dinner. She walked back toward the kitchen. Through the room she had built. Past the tables she had filled. Toward the man who was standing near the service station with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up. Reviewing something on a tablet. And who looked up when she approached with that particular quality of attention she had first noticed at a corner table on a night when everyone in the restaurant had expected something to be funny, and instead it had turned out to be the beginning of something none of them had the vocabulary for. She stopped beside him. How are we? On the second seating she signed. 2 minutes out. He replied. Then you saw her. I seated her by the window. He looked at her. You didn't have to. I know. She signed. That's why I did. He turned back to his tablet. She turned back to her floor. The city went on doing its useful and indifferent work outside the glass. And inside, the bread was warm. And everything was running exactly on time.